Ground was the type that was born perfect. Unlike every other type in Gen 1, it wasn't accidentally overtuned, wasn't accidentally undertuned, didn't fail at its intended design role, didn't suffer from mismatched stats, was not lacking moves, and wasn't lacking in representatives throughout the game. Let's review. The type was first encountered extremely early as an enemy through Brock, and we get our hands on it soon after, with Sandshrew and Geodude being monotype and dual-type early game tanks who demonstrate Ground's defensive capabilities. If you find a Moonstone, you can get Nidoking and Nidoqueen, a pair of versatile jacks-of-all-trades with extremely balanced stat spreads. At Vermilion, there is Diglett's Cave, home to fragile speedsters Diglett and Dugtrio, who just so happen to outspeed Raichu by 20 points. My, isn't that convenient? As we approach the mid-game, we are reunited with former tutorial boss Onyx in the Rock Tunnel, which has the unique but terrible combination of high defense and speed but low attack. We meet Cubone and Marowak, who have worse stats than Sandslash but compensate by naturally learning ground moves without needing TMs. Finally, there's Rhyhorn and Rhydon, who reprise Geodude's tank-based stat line, but with greater stats befitting their late-game status. So unlike Ice, Ghost, and Dragon, Ground was consistently present throughout the game, from the first gym till the last. Unlike Electric, its Pokémon feature a diverse range of stat spreads and roles. And unlike Bug and Fighting, these Pokémon were all actually usable, because they were given the tools to succeed. Earthquake, to this day, remains Pokémon's gold standard in power. It's only 100 base power and nothing else, because it doesn't need anything else. Underneath the illusion of complex mechanics, type matchups, statuses, and secondary effects, the game of Pokémon is ultimately won by knocking out your opponent. And when doing that, big number is always king. The developers were well aware of that, and so balanced Earthquake via availability. In every game, it is only found late or naturally learned at high levels, if at all. Imagine how broken it'd be if you could get an Earthquake TM by the second gym. Well, you don't need to imagine, you just needed to play Gen 1, where Dig had 100 base power, and was obtained in Cerulean City. Since the trainer AI does not have the brains to play around the turn you are unhittable, it ends up being Earthquake at the second gym, making Gen 1 Dig the single most overpowered TM in Pokémon history. The humble Geodude and Sandshrew can now have impressive damage output, whereas giving it to Nidoking and Nidoqueen lets them trivialize the entire game. Someone at Game Freak quickly caught on and nerfed Dig's power to 60 in Gen 2 and its availability into a mid-game move. Meanwhile, on the opposite end of the game progression, Ground received another nerf. Fissure was removed as a TM. Seems unimportant, but remember that Game Freak back then genuinely believed one-hit KO moves were a lot more powerful than they ended up being, and were learned by very few Pokémon. The mere fact that they gave Ground the most readily accessible version and made it the type specialty of Giovanni, the game's villain and final gym leader, says a lot about how high Game Freak's expectations for the type were, and Ground's performance definitely met those expectations. Of course, Ground's strength stemmed from more than just big numbers. It also had great matchups against the other types, especially offensively. Super effective damage against fire, rock, and poison was incredibly valuable due to them being prominent offensive specialists or being otherwise common encounters in the game. In exchange, being only resisted by grass and bug was laughably inconsequential. Every grass Pokemon in Gen 1 except Tangela was also a poison type, neutering the resistance, and bug was, well, bug. This balance was likely decided due to flying being so common. The thought process probably went something like, well, if Ground was going to automatically fail against so many things, it better be good at hitting everything else to compensate. It's sort of a similar logic as to why Electric is allowed to be so good at hitting stuff. Speaking of Electric, this same thought process also applies to Ground's defensive qualities, except reversed. The sheer value of an Electric immunity meant that Ground's other resistances were made fairly lackluster to compensate. Neither Poison nor Rock were exceptionally useful resistances to have in Gen 1, whereas War and Grass were commonplace. This is what tilts the Ground-Grass matchup heavily into Grass's favor. Their secondary poison typings meant they take neutral damage damage from Earthquake, but they could still hit the ground type super effectively. This grass weakness would become more significant in future. Grass gained more attacking moves beyond Razor Leaf and Solar Beam, separated itself from Poison, and diversified away from being predominantly support specialists. The ice weakness also became more problematic over time, as ice damage became increasingly accessible and widely used as coverage. However, at the end of the day, the sheer value of an electric immunity means it's hard to ever say a defensive ground type is a bad thing, since electric is such an otherwise great offensive type. Pretty much any type can be paired with ground and make it work, with one infamous exception. Rock Ground is one of the more infamous bad type combos in the game, though in my personal opinion, it's still far from the worst. That will be Bug Flying. Zero redeeming qualities there. People often think this is a rather common type combo, but it's actually unexpectedly rare. Only 4 Pokemon lines to date have this type: the Geodude line, Rhyhorn line, Larvitar line, and Onix. Among those 4, only Rhyperior adamantly stands by this typing. Tyranitar and Steelix changed types upon evolving, while Golem swapped to Electric Rock after gaining Hawaiian citizenship. Game Freak never revisited this type combo for a good reason. It's terrible. The only real benefit it provides is a great offensive stab combination, which might theoretically be good on a fragile speedster or glass cannon attacker, but that doesn't really fit the design philosophy of rocks. That said, Onix and Geodude being Brock's Pokemon makes them iconic, and likely influenced how people perceived and understood these two types. There is a common belief that Rock and Ground should have been a single type due to their overlapping concepts and shared weaknesses to Grass and Water. However, this theory isn't supported by the game's data. In the list for type data, Ground and Rock are IDs 4 and 5 respectively, implying they were added together and were thus conceived as two separate types from an early stage in development. If they were a single idea which was then split up, they'd be located in separate positions in the data list, like with Flying and Bird, indicating one of the entries was added much later. With that out of the way, the question now moves from how to why. Why were Ground and Rock created as separate types? After all, in many media, Earth powers are typically portrayed via throwing rocks and manipulating the ground, so you'd expect Pokemon to combine them as a package deal. The likely answer was because Game Freak separated them to achieve different objectives in creature design and aesthetics. Rock is a very rigid concept. Most rock Pokemon are visually designed after inorganic rock monsters or constructs such as Sudowoodo, Nosepass, Barbaracle, Stonejourner, Minyo, or Carbink. More organic rocks, such as Rhyhorn, Dwebble, or Rockruff, are much rarer. Many are either fossils or are some other fantastical creature which only looks organic, such as Macargo, which is a pile of lava in the shape of a snail, or Corsola, which is... actually coral is a living animal, I guess? Look, I'm not a marine biologist, okay? The type was also supposed to be a physical tank, with high defense and normal resistance being its major selling point. Many rock Pokemon to this day adhere to this stat spread. Emphasis on supposed to be. It didn't actually work out in practice, but hey, that's why they made Steel and turned Rock into an offensive type instead. If you want to hear more about that, you should go watch the Rock and Steel type videos. Ground, comparatively, is a very versatile concept. Ground Pokemon are visually designed after animals loosely associated with sand, mud, or living underground. Gligar is a scorpion, Wooper is an axolotl, Mudkip is a mudskipper, Trapinch is an antlion, Numel is a camel, Drillbur and Diglett are moles, Silicobra is a desert cobra, and so on. The number of inorganic creatures is much fewer compared to rock. Stuff like the Baltoy, Golett, Runerigus, and Sandygast lines are rare compared to the number of animals, and are typically made out of materials which are not rocks, like clay and sand. Lastly, some ground Pokemon are also given the type despite being based on animals which have nothing to do with mud at all. Phanpy is an elephant, Sandal is a Gavial, Hippowdon is a hippo, and Ursaluna is a bear. The most egregious example of this is Garchomp, which is a shark, that is also a dragon, that lives on land and somehow flies. On land, sea, and air, it is said that this Pokemon is known as the strongest creature among all living things. In a one-on-one, always bet on Garchomp. This is another design use case for the ground type, as a modifier. Conventionally, these animals would be better suited for other types like water or normal, but ground is a versatile concept, and so can be added to make these animals feel more exotic and fantastical. In that regard, regards, it's similar to flying, except it doesn't involve stapling wings onto the animal like with Gligar. This versatility in creature designs is what leads to ground Pokemon having such diverse stat spreads, while rock Pokemon all follow the same template. Most Pokemon usually have stats and playstyles which are consistent with their appearance, source inspiration, and in-universe lore. This is a good visual design practice which most Pokemon adhere to. In the rare cases where they don't, players usually end up confused. Do you remember Vikavolt so-called exceptional mobility? The anime even had an episode showing them racing at high speed. 483 speed stat. Yup. Anyways, the creature designs of rock Pokemon communicate the idea of heavy, bulky, and slow. Players won't expect a living boulder to be very quick under ordinary circumstances, but a crocodile, mole, rabbit, or flying scorpion? Yeah, a player could be convinced that these would be speedy. It's impressive how versatile and well executed Ground was by the standards of Gen 1. However, there is a trade-off to perfection, and that is stagnation. Unlike every other type in the game, Ground has seen zero evolution between Gen 1 and today. It didn't explore any new archetypes, gained no revolutionary new moves, and directly engaged with no new mechanics. It's done nothing but click Earthquake for 30 years. From a game design standpoint, this is the most boring type in all of Pokemon. Its only changes were the universal improvements which all types received. Gen 2 introduced Weather, with Sandstorm being shared between Rock, Ground, and Steel. However, only Rock received a significant effect of extra special defense, while Ground and Steel were only provided passive immunity. Gen 3 introduced Doubles and made Earthquake into a spread move. This altered its use case from the best option every time into a high value option with a significant drawback to plan around. Players were incentivized to use Earthquake alongside a flying type or Levitate to negate the downside. Alternatively, use the Earthquake Protect combo, which many Colosseum players should be unpleasantly familiar with. Outside of Colosseum, however, the main game of Pokemon remained a singles format game, so Earthquake remained unaffected for the vast majority of situations. Gen 4 added the physical special split. However, as it turned out, there are very few special ground Pokemon. The majority were physical or mixed attackers, so Earth Power ended up being more often used as coverage by non-ground types rather than as a stab option. We would eventually receive special focused ground types like Palossand and Blood Moon Ursaluna, and mixed ground types were given incentives to use special attacks, like with Mega Camerupt's ability and Landorus' signature move, but this did not start happening until Gen 6 and were exceptions rather than the norm. Gen 5 created Golurk. This didn't change anything, but Golurk is awesome, so I'm mentioning it anyway. Shout out to user Bilor on Reddit for this video's thumbnail and their album of 300 plus ridiculous Golurk artwork. Every type also gained more early, mid, and late game options as time passed. However, Ground's physical alternatives such as Drill Run and High Horsepower had lower power than Earthquake. So unless you were intentionally playing doubles and wanted a single target option, there was little reason to use them. For the overwhelming majority of ground types, they just continued to click Earthquake. The real change regarding ground was how the rest of the game evolved around it. Gen 3 introduced abilities, significantly expanding the game's design space mechanically and aesthetically. Any winged or floating Pokemon could now be given Levitate instead of being made into a flying type, indirectly nerfing ground since a bunch of random things were now immune to it. For some Pokemon like Flygon, Claydol, Latinas, and Latinos,
I just love Latias, Sonic. What? 7 out of 10, too much water.
Levitate is mainly an aesthetic choice and relatively minor bonus. For others like Weezing, Bronzong, and Electros, it was a pretty big deal, since they had typings which would otherwise leave them with a ground weakness. While some offensive Pokemon like Hydreigon would have definitely appreciated a more offensive focused ability which better suits their playstyles, it's hard for any Pokemon to really be upset about getting a free immunity. Except Rotom Fan, someone was clearly having a laugh there. Later, the Air Balloon was added, though this was less for aesthetic reasons and more for competitive reasons, since competitive play had started to actually become a thing by Gen 5. Moves like Magnet Rise and Telekinesis experimented with ground negation mechanics. The idea of allowing an electric Pokemon to outspeed and become immune to a ground Pokemon switch-in is cool, but the opportunity cost was generally not worth it, and these moves ended up as niche tech options. What this does mean, however, is that you can tie a balloon to the fan and use Telekinesis on it for the legendary quadruple ground immunity. The latest innovation in anti-ground technology is grassy terrain, which boosts grass damage, provides passive healing, enables the funny monkey glide, and halves the power of earthquake, bulldoze, and magnitude. Note that this doesn't refer to all ground moves, just those three specifically. Other moves like drill run or earth power are totally unaffected. In case Game Freak's refusal to directly adjust its power for 9 generations didn't make it obvious enough, clicking earthquake seems to have become accepted as part of the game's overall balance, and the design direction for ground moves is more about creating situational use cases rather than trying to directly power creep earthquake. These design decisions aren't exactly wrong per se. After all, ground was never truly broken in the same way some other types were, and as a general rule, both for making games and in real life, you don't fix what isn't broken. But the natural consequence of nothing being fixed is that nothing is ever improved. While every other type has identified flaws in their design and changed to improve the game as a whole, ground's core design has remained the same since Gen 1, and the developers and players are largely content to leave it that way. Even when they had the opportunity to shake up the type system 13 years ago by adding Fairy, ground was left completely untouched, and it will likely continue to stay this way even after another 10 years pass. Then again, perhaps that's fine. For better or worse, everyone has gotten used to ground's place in the game, and it's served as a foundation for numerous design and balancing decisions for years, both major and minor. Trying to change it risks causing huge upsets across the already messy balance for no real reason. Some things are best left untouched, I suppose. At least, that's my opinion. Maybe yours differs. Tell me, what are your own thoughts about this type, and my conclusions to it? What is your own personal favorite ground Pokemon? Personally, I've always been a Quagsire appreciator myself. This closes the show on another type. Remember to leave a comment so the algorithm thinks I make good content, and I'll see you around next time.